Let me tell you something about the Vorak Collective. We believed, with complete confidence and very little self-awareness, that we were the smartest species in the galaxy. We had taken 14 worlds, that we had crushed 6 civilizations so badly their ruins still showed on our old war maps, and we had left 2 others crying their way into surrender. Our fleets stretched across star lanes like black metal rivers. We had weapons, planning, discipline, and enough arrogance to power a small moon. And then we met the humans. Actually, that is not even correct. They met us first. And looking back now, that should have been the first warning. The first flashing, screaming, impossible to ignore sign that everything we thought we knew was about to be turned inside out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Breath. I was a grade 4 intelligence analyst for Vorakai Command, which sounds important until you understand what it really means. IT means I read reports other people were too bored to read. I have 3 eyes, but only 2 of them worked. I keep the useless one open during meetings because it makes me look serious. This small trick has done more for my career than most of my actual work. That I was never a great officer. I was not brave. That I was not charming. That I was not one of those analysts who could turn a half-finished data packet into a dramatic speech and make commanders feel clever for listening. What I was, unfortunately for everyone involved, was observant. That observation nearly got me fired 11 times. That IT also kept me alive. This is my account of the day. Humanity decided to teach the Vorak Collective a lesson. A careful lesson. A painful lesson. And worst of all, a lesson designed so perfectly that by the time we understood it, the teaching part was already over. You should understand something about humans before I continue. They are not subtle. That is the mistake many species make. Humans do not do subtle in the way we mean it. They do something much worse. They make you think they're being simple. They let you relax. They let you build a nice, comfortable explanation in your own mind. And then, just when you're most pleased with yourself, they flip the floor open and reveal that your safe situation was only a painted lid over a very deep and very active volcano. That is how this began. With a day that felt ordinary. That I was at my station in the intelligence processing hub aboard the command ship Vorith Ascendancy .17. Other analysts sat around me, pretending to work, while mostly ignoring reports about a small blue-green planet in the Orion Spur. That planet had recently started sending signals into deep space. We had known about it for roughly 40 of their years. That we had classified its people as a Category 3 primitive species. That meant they had fire, early space, travel, and had not yet destroyed themselves. That last point, in fairness, already placed them above several species we had studied. Still, no one thought they mattered. The planet was called Earth. That I had read every file we had on it, every intercepted signal, every scout note, every civilian broadcast, every military recording, every cultural fragment. While everyone else chased threats with bigger ships and cleaner profit margins, I kept collecting Earth data and storing it away. Quietly, carefully. A little obsessively. I found them fascinating. My supervisor, senior intelligence officer Thoric, found that embarrassing. Breath, he said that morning, sliding a data strip across my station without even looking at me. You have flagged Earth 12 times in the last 3 months. 12 times suggests consistency, I said. 12 times suggests paranoia, he replied. They are primitive. They barely leave their own system. They sent a machine to a nearby planet and celebrated as if they had conquered the stars. They're not a threat. They're the only species we have ever studied, I said, that turns military thinking into entertainment. That got his attention for half a second. Then came the look. You know, the one the face senior officers make when they realize a lower-ranking analyst is about to say something technically intelligent and socially unhelpful. They call it sport. I continued. They take large groups of strong, aggressive individuals, divide them into sides, put them in controlled spaces, and make them fight over territory, movement lanes, resource control, and timing. Then they do it again, and again, and again. Their children play simplified versions. Their adults watch the professionals and argue over strategy for pleasure. Breath, Thoric said, slow and tired. Those are games. Yes, I said. That is the part one find troubling. He stared at me. I kept going anyway, which is why I was not popular. They train for competition from childhood. They lose, adapt, try again, learn patterns, change tactics, and repeat. They turned failure into rehearsal. They normalized strategic thinking before maturity. Thoric's secondary eye ridge dropped. That was the expression he used when counting silently to stop himself from saying something career-damaging. Then he said, Category 3, file the assessment and move on. So I did. Officially, I filed Earth under Category 3. Unofficially, I placed a personal watch flag on every incoming packet tied to Earth coordinates. Because something about that world felt wrong in a very specific way. Not dangerous yet. Not directly. More like standing near the edge of a cliff in thick fog. The ground is still under your feet. Nothing has happened. But something ancient in your nervous system is already whispering. Pay attention. So, I did. It was the best decision of my life. The human arrived 3 cycles later. She came in a battered little shuttle that drifted into our patrol zone, broadcasting a Vorak distress signal. That by itself should have frozen half the ship. Humans were not supposed to know our distress frequencies. They were certainly not supposed to use them correctly. That I was not in the receiving bay when the shuttle docked. I was on the upper observation deck, pressed so close to the viewing barrier that my nose flattened against the panel in a way that I refused to feel shame about. Below me stood Commander Kovacs with 4 armed guards and the expression of a man who had spent too many years winning easy fights. Kovacs was Fleet's second in command. Tall, armored, polished, loud, that he had conquered 3 planets personally and kept enemy banners in his private quarters. He was admired by people who thought confidence was the same thing as intelligence, that he was also, as gently as I can say this, one of the least imaginative military minds ever given authority over anything sharper than a ceremonial fork, which made him exactly the right person for what was about to happen. The shuttle hatch opened. The human stepped out. That I had seen humans in recordings before that did not prepare me for seeing one in person. They're an alarming species when viewed up close, soft, mostly hairless, except in places where the hair seems to serve no obvious purpose. No armor, no claws worth respecting, no visible venom, no external defensive structures. They look like a species evolution forgot to finish. And yet there she was, not a human female, medium height, brown skin, dark hair pulled tight behind her head, civilian clothing, empty hands, calm posture, and a smile. That smile struck me harder than the distress signal. Not a frightened smile, not a desperate smile, not the trembling, hopeful smile of someone rescued from danger. To know this was the smile of someone who knew exactly where she was, exactly what came next, and exactly how this scene ended. I pulled up her bio skin so fast I nearly cracked my station. Console. Name. PETA Win age. 34 Earth years former occupation. Strategic Intelligence Coordinator, Earth Defense Coalition former. That word sat there like a blade hidden in cloth. Below, in perfect Vorak standard, she said, I would like to make a deal. That was warning sign number 3. I stopped counting after that. Once the list becomes absurd, numbers stop helping. Kovacs stared at her with the smug patience of a man fully convinced that power belonged to him. A deal? He asked. Yes, she said pleasantly. You arrive in our space in a human shuttle, he said, using a Vorak distress code, speaking Vorak standard, and expect us to believe you came alone? You may believe whatever helps you remain comfortable, she replied, still smiling, as long as we continue talking. And because Kovacs was Kovacs, he thought that line was bold and interesting instead of deeply, deeply dangerous. He should have thrown her back out the hatch and burned the shuttle for good measure. Instead, he escorted her inside. That I requested an emergency meeting with Oric before the cycle ended. He scheduled it for 3 cycles later. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously my concern was being taken. When I entered his office, he was already reading the preliminary report on PETA Win. Worse, he looked pleased. Not cautious, not curious. Pleased. She's offering us the entire Earth invasion package, he said before I even sat down. He tapped the report with one claw. Defense grid locations. Communication encryption. Orbital duty rotations. Weapons alignment windows. Everything. I sat opposite him and said, she knows our distress frequencies. She claims she got them from a damaged scout probe years ago and kept them hidden for years until now. I said, yes. Why? Because she was waiting for the right moment. I leaned forward. That is exactly my problem. They'll excite the way superiors do when they think patience itself should count as mentorship. She has a motive, he said. Political fallout. Loss of rank. Loss of status. Loss of future. She wants revenge on her own people. I looked at him for a long second. That is almost too perfect. What does that mean? It means it sounds exactly like the kind of story a human would build if they wanted us to trust them. He frowned. She is offering us everything. Yes, I said, and for almost nothing. Her demand, according to the file, was safe passage for herself and 43 named individuals. That was it. 44 lives in exchange for a planet. That was not a bargain. That was bait. Either she is lying, Thoric said, or she truly hates her own side. Or, I said carefully, she wants us to choose between those two explanations, so we never ask the better question. He folded his hands. And what is the better question, Breath? I took a breath. Why did she prepare this so well? That got silenced. I continued. She entered our patrol zone without tripping a single proximity warning until she chose to broadcast. She speaks our language. She knows our codes. Her story is believable in a way that feels manufactured. Everything about this looks clean. Too clean. Humans are messy. They improvise. They fight over stupid things. They carry emotion into strategy. But this is neat. Neat is dangerous. Thoric looked tired now. Your concern is noted, he said. That phrase, for the record, means, I have heard you and do not intend to do anything with what I heard. The verification team will test our information before operational use. How long? 30 cycles. And until then, he glanced back down at the report. She is our guest. I returned to my station. I reopened my Earth file. Under my first personal flag, I added a second one to a bright red. Just 2 words. Watch everything. So I did. And P to win as a guest was extraordinary. Not in an admirable way, in the way a well-made trap is extraordinary. You see the design, you recognize the skill, and somewhere deep inside yourself, you understand that appreciation and safety are not the same thing. She was placed in the civilian quarters under light guard. She was given access to filtered information terminals and common areas. She accepted all of it with perfect calm. She ate our food without complaint, which by itself was suspicious. Vorak ship rations taste like powdered wall material mixed with regret. She slept easily. That bothered me more than anything else, that a real traitor should not sleep well aboard an alien warship, that a real defector should flinch. Second guess. Pace. Watch the doors. Peta Wynn did none of that. She rested like a person waiting for a timetable. She spent long periods reading public records about Vorak expansion history. Not randomly, with focus, with method, with the quiet seriousness of someone studying for an exam. She never asked for special treatment, never pushed too hard, never acted afraid. Never once looked like someone whose future depended on the mercy of strangers. She looked like someone whose plan was already moving exactly as expected. On the 9th cycle of her stay, I saw something I still think about. She was in the common area, reading from a terminal. Then she stopped, looked up toward the ceiling, smiled for just a second. A small, private smile. The kind people make when something goes right, and they do not need to tell anyone. Then she returned to reading. The ceiling she had looked at housed the external sensor relay linked to the analyst monitoring stations. Why monitoring stations? I stared at that feed for a long time. Then I turned back to my console and began writing the most detailed threat report of my career. That I listed every inconsistency in her story. That I cross-checked her record with intercepted Earth files. That I calculated the odds of a true political defector knowing our distress. System and patrol timing. The odds were ugly. I added a cultural appendix on human deception patterns, including something they call the long con, which they apparently discuss in their media with disturbing enthusiasm. That I submitted the report before end cycle B. Why then, I was no longer asking whether Peter Wynn was telling the truth. That question had become too small. The real question was worse. What truth was she showing us on purpose? And why did she seem so calm about what would happen when we believed it? Thoric called me into his office the next cycle. This time he was not pretending to be patient. He looked irritated in the very controlled way senior officers do when they want you to understand that you are becoming professionally inconvenient. Kovacs has reviewed the preliminary verification, he said. The coordinates she gave us match our long-range maps. The communication keys work against intercepted Earth traffic. The duty schedules align. The weapons data aligns. Her information is real. I sat down slowly. Yes, I said. That is exactly what frightens me. He stared at me. You are now concerned that her intelligence is accurate? I am concerned, I said, that it is accurate and that she gave it to us. He made the expression people always made when I said something they believed was clever in the wrong direction. Breath. We finally have what every invasion planner dreams of. A complete internal picture of a target system. Minimal losses. Rapid victory. No drawn-out resistance. Yes, I said quietly. It looks like a dream. That is the problem. His posture stiffened. Say clearly what you are suggesting. So I did. I am suggesting that Earth has watched us study them for 40 years. I am suggesting they know what we expect primitive species to look like. I am suggesting that the easiest conquest in collective history may have been designed to look easy because someone wants us to move fast, feel clever, and stop asking questions. There was a pause, long enough for me to think, just for a foolish second, that perhaps he was finally listening. Then he said, "You are reassigned to Deep Archive Review for 60 cycles." I blinked all three eyes. That assignment is where they send analysts when leadership wants them out of the way without officially punishing them for being difficult at SO. In a sense, it was almost flattering that I spent the next 12 cycles in Deep Archive Review. That if you have never worked in Deep Archive, imagine being buried alive under old survey data and then told to alphabetize the dirt that I reviewed ancient scans. Corrected filing tags, compared asteroid records from sectors nobody cared about anymore. And, thanks to a bureaucratic permissions error no one had fixed in years, I also continued accessing several systems I was technically not supposed to still have, including the guest quarter monitoring feeds, which is how I watched Peter Wynn continue being the least believable defector I had ever seen that on Cycle 14, Commander Kovacs visited her personally. That was unusual that let me be more honest. That was alarming. Kovacs did not visit guests, that he received summaries about guests. The fact that he went himself meant things were going very well from his point of view. He carried gifts at a small container of filtered Vorak mineral water and a data scroll with what he no doubt considered impressive reading material. A record of 3 major Vorak military victories. He presented them with all the awkward pride of man attempting diplomacy through self-congratulation. Peter Wynn accepted both with perfect courtesy. Your language skills are impressive, Kovacs told her. I have studied Vorak. For years, she replied. I wanted to be prepared. Prepared for this? He asked. Prepared to communicate clearly when the time came to make this choice, she said. Then she said something I did not understand fully at the time, but which I have replayed in my head ever since. She said, Commander, when this is over, I want to make sure everyone involved fully understands what happened. Kovacs heard a polite statement, a normal sentence, post-conflict clarity, historical accuracy, diplomatic closure, that I heard something else. Because of the way she said it, because of the look on her face, it was the same look I had seen in human competition footage during the last moments of a match when one side already knew the result and was only waiting for the clock to catch up. She looked like someone who had already won. That was when I stopped thinking in terms of deception alone. Deception explains false information, that IT does not explain confidence like that. Confidence like that comes from structure, from timing, from a plan already in motion. That on Cycle 22, the verification team completed its analysis. The report reached every senior intelligence analyst. Technically, because of the same administrative failures still not fixed, I remained on that distribution list. The report was 62 pages long. The conclusion was 8 words. All provided intelligence has been independently verified as accurate. I read those 8 words and felt something cold move through my secondary circulation, because this is the thing that commanders forget and analysts are supposed to remember. Verified intelligence tells you the information is real, that IT does not tell you the information is complete. In '01, in those 22 cycles had asked the correct question. Not one of us. Not Thoric. Not the verification team. Not Kovacs. Not the strategic planners. Not the operations staff. Not even me. Not soon enough, we kept asking whether Peter Wynn's data was true. We never asked what she had chosen not to give us. That question arrived like a blade, sliding quietly in a place that I opened every Earth-related file I had ever saved. Not the fixed bases. She had given us those, not the orbital stations. She had given us those too. Not the command schedules, encryption sets, weapons alignments, or installation maps. No, I went looking for the things humans never put cleanly into formal records. The things they hide inside civilian systems, commercial traffic supply chains, maintenance routes, and harmless-looking movement logs. Because humans understand something many military species never learn. Official records are for the enemy. The real plan lives somewhere messier that I pulled 8 years of. Intercepted military broadcasts, long-range survey files, commercial freight manifests, civilian shipping routes, medical transport logs, agricultural supply traffic, construction tonnage reports, anything moving through the outer system. And then I saw a pattern, a very human pattern. Civilian freight volume in the outer system had doubled over the last 14 months, not military traffic. Civilian, food shipments, construction materials, equipment containers, pharmaceutical runs, repair cargo, routine support loads, all of it crossing and recrossing the same 4 coordinates point 4 cold outer system points that did not appear anywhere in Peter Wynn's intelligence package, that I cross-checked them against our maps, that nothing in installations, in major stations, in known military zone. Just rock, ice, dark, and distance, which meant one of two things. Either the pattern was meaningless coincidence, or someone had hidden something important exactly where we were least interested in looking. That I wrote another report. Faster this time, sharper, in polished argument structure, in elegant appendix. Just a core warning. Unusual civilian freight concentration at 4 unsurveyed outer system coordinates, not included in the provided intelligence. Possible undisclosed facilities or military assets. Recommend immediate long-range survey before operational planning proceeds. That I sent it to Thoric. That I sent it to Kovacs' intelligence liaison. That I sent copies to 3 analysts senior enough to matter and, more importantly, not openly hostile to the idea that reality occasionally behaves in inconvenient ways. Then I waited. Thoric replied 12 hours later. .1 line. Operational planning is proceeding. Refrain from distributing analysis outside your current assignment scope. Kovacs' liaison replied 6 hours after that. Also 1 line. Your submission has been received. The other analyst said nothing at all. I read the replies twice. Then I opened the guest quarter monitoring feed again. Peter Wynn sat at her terminal, calm as always, reading as if she were passing time in a quiet library rather than sitting inside the command ship of an empire preparing to invade her species. There is a kind of stillness that means rest. There is another kind that means completion. She had the second kind. The invasion planning meeting was scheduled for cycle 30. I had 8 cycles, .8 cycles, to stop a disaster that everyone with actual authority had already decided was a triumph. I considered going above Thoric, above Kovacs, straight to General Sora on the homeworld. That would have ended my career instantly and probably changed nothing. That I thought about remaining silent, that I even tried to convince myself. That perhaps I had finally pushed my pattern recognition too far, that perhaps years of watching Earth had turned me into exactly what they all thought I was: paranoid, obsessed, unable to let go. Then I remembered Peter Wynn smiling at the ceiling on cycle 9. And I kept writing. The final report I sent was the most important thing I had ever produced. IT went above Thoric, above Kovacs, into command oversight. I cited 8 years of Earth observation. The freight anomalies, human logistical behavior, their military habit of masking force movement through civilian channels, their long-term planning culture, their preference for setting conditions before conflict begins. I ended with a direct recommendation: suspend operation, conduct full outer system survey, reassess all intelligence provided by Source P. When under assumption of deliberate strategic shaping, that I sent it at the start of Cycle 20-5, HFY Cycle 26. I had been formally suspended from active intelligence duty pending review of my conduct at HFY Cycle 28. Peter Wynn had been granted access to the operational briefing room as an advisory consultant. No civilian source in the history of the Vorak Collective had ever been invited into that room. But now she was there because Kovacs trusted her, because success makes fools generous, and because when a trap is working, the victim usually calls it efficiency. By Cycle 29, I was back in Deep Archive, reading a 70-year-old survey of an irrelevant asteroid field, while trying to live with the very specific pain of being completely right and completely ignored at the same time. The invasion planning meeting happened without me. Later, I learned that Peter Wynn had asked several thoughtful questions during the session. She raised concern about one approach vector. Not all of them, just one. And she suggested an alternative. Kovacs thanked her. Then he ordered the fleet formation changed to match her recommendation. When I heard that, I sat very still for a long time. Not because I fully understood, because some part of me did. I did not sleep that cycle. I lay awake in my bunk and thought about humans, about the way they lose and return, about the way they practice, about the way they turn repeated failure into refinement. Their stories are full of impossible odds. Their games reward adaptation. Their military history worships planning, endurance, and timing. That we have been watching them for 40 years and still fail to understand the simplest thing about them. Humans do not mind looking weak while they are preparing. The fleet moved on Cycle 32.412 warships, magnificent, disciplined, layered in the formation Peter Wynn had helped refine. All pointed toward Earth, all armed for what was expected to be one of the cleanest acquisitions in collective history that I watched through an archive terminal I was absolutely not authorized to use for live navigation. The formation looked beautiful. That is worth saying because ugly disasters are common. Beautiful disasters are memorable. And while the fleet advanced, I kept staring at those 4 outer system coordinates, those empty points, those cold pieces of nothing. Those harmless coordinates tied together by 14 months of civilian. Afraid that I asked myself one last time, what do you build in deep space with that much cargo and no official record? The answer came immediately, because at that exact moment, the outer system sensor array lit up. Not a small flare, not random movement. The entire display bloomed with power signatures so sudden and so bright that for 1/6 second, I thought the system itself had split open. 4 massive structures came online at once. Not rocks, not ice, not empty space. 4 full-scale military platforms, powered down until that exact second, built to mimic inert asteroid mass. Invisible at range because they had been designed to be invisible. Absent from every map, because the maps we had were the ones Peter Wynn wanted us to have. I grabbed the edge of my console so hard I nearly snapped the casing. On the command channel, which I was also not authorized to monitor, I heard Kovacs' voice lose its certainty for the first time. What is that? And over a secondary communication line, calm and clear, I heard Peter Wynn reply, Commander, I want to make sure you fully understand what is happening. She said it exactly the way she had said it before. Not with fear, not with triumph, with the quiet patience of someone arriving at the part of the lesson she had always intended us to reach. The 4 platforms finished powering up, and in that moment, we understood 2 things. First, we had made a mistake. Second, we still had not grasped how large that mistake was. The 4 platforms came fully online. That was the first moment we understood we had made a mistake. What happened after that was the moment we understood how carefully that mistake had been built. I was still in Deep Archive, still at my unauthorized console, still listening to channels I was very much not supposed to hear it on the command feed. Kovacs began doing what commanders like Kovacs always do when reality stops cooperating. That he got louder. Battle formation. Raise shields. Weapons hot. Full scan on those platforms. Now, that kind of voice is useful in a crisis if the crisis is made of nervous junior officers and minor equipment problems. IT is less useful when the crisis is a trap someone else finished building months ago. The scan came in less than a minute later. I saw the numbers at almost the same time the bridge did. Each platform carried an armament load roughly 3 times that of a Vorak heavy cruiser. That alone was bad enough. But the weapon's density was not the worst part. The worst part was where they were positioned. They had been placed at exact intervals around the approach line. Not just any approach line. Our approach line. The one Peter Wynn had recommended in the briefing. The one Kovacs had adopted after thanking her for the suggestion. The one that had arranged 412 Vorak warships into what, from a tactical geometry standpoint, was not an assault formation at all. It was a containment shape. She had not given us the safest route. She had given us the route that placed our fleet exactly where those platforms wanted us. I sat there staring at the display and said, out loud, to no one, she told him. She actually told him. Because she had, not in the obvious way, not in some dramatic villainous confession that I am the cleaner way, the human way, she had simply made the useful suggestion at the right moment, knowing exactly what kind of man Kovacs was and exactly how pleased he would be to think he had welcomed expert insight from a defeated enemy. That was the part one hated most, not just that the trap worked, that it worked through him so easily. On the command channel, Kovacs tried opening communication with the platforms. He probably thought they might be automated. Or defensive only. Or perhaps, and this would be very much in character, he believed forceful tone alone could still rescue the situation. The response came on broad spectrum. Every ship in the fleet heard it. A human voice. Male. Older. Calm in a way only very confident people can afford to be calm. Vorak Fleet Command, he said, this is Admiral Tobias Finn of the Earth Defense Coalition. You're currently within the engagement envelope of 4 coalition defense platforms. Your fleet formation has been confirmed in optimal interdiction position. I am transmitting our terms. Our terms. Not a warning, not a request, not a negotiation opening. Terms. That word hit the bridge harder than the platforms had. The data packet followed 4 seconds later. I pulled onto my screen that IT was not a surrender demand in the way we understood surrender demands. Finn was not asking us to throw down weapons and beg. Humans, I would later learn, have a habit of preferring outcomes that teach as much as they damage. The terms were specific, measured, practical, immediate Vorak withdrawal from the Sol system. Formal acknowledgement on all open channels that we had entered human-controlled space with hostile intent. A 10-year non-engagement period. Verification conditions for stage departure. And one final clause, placed at the end in plain, clean language. The kind of sentence you write when you want the reader to understand that this part matters most. That IT required the Vorak Collective to return all intelligence provided by Peter Wynn and acknowledge in writing that the material had been part of a deliberate counterintelligence operation. Not partly false, not corrupted, not mixed. The packet stated something much more brutal than that. IT stated that no intelligence obtained through that channel should ever be used for hostile action because the package, in operational terms, was false. I remember reading that and feeling my thoughts stop for half a second because I already knew the data had been verified. The coordinates were real. The keys were real. The schedules were real. The weapons. Alignments were real. Oh, how could all of it be false? Then I understood. And once I understood, I wanted very badly to be wrong. Peter Wynn had given us accurate intelligence. Perfectly accurate AS of 14 months ago. That was the trick, not fabricated data. Old data, verified, cross-checked, independently confirmed. Fully real intelligence about an Earth defense structure that no longer existed in that form. Every base location she gave us had once been correct. Every key had once worked. Every rotation schedule had once been current. Every weapon's alignment had once been exactly where she said it was. And while we spent 22 cycles proving her package was authentic, Earth had already moved everything that mattered, changed every system, shifted every rotation, repositioned every real defense, built 4 huge hidden platforms in the outer system, and then waited for us to arrive using a map of Ghost. I sat there in deep archive and thought with what I must admit was not the highest analytical dignity of my career. Oh no. Not because it was eloquent, because it was correct. Kovacs did not accept the terms immediately. Of course, he did not. He was still Kovacs, still decorated, still proud, still the man with conquer planets and framed enemy banners and a voice built for certainty. For 40 full minutes, he searched for another answer. I know because I listened to every one of those minutes. He asked for engagement probability against the 4 Platforms. The weapons officers gave him numbers he clearly hated that he asked about rapid dispersal formations. The navigation team gave him worse numbers that he contacted Senior Tactical Commander Vex, one of the few officers in the fleet who actually was imaginative and demanded alternatives. Vex produced 3 that I did not hear the full text of them, but I heard Kovacs's reactions. The first option brought silence. The second brought that strained, grinding sound Vorak armor makes when someone is trying not to panic inside it. The third brought something I had never before heard from a senior fleet officer. IT was the sound of man reaching the end of available excuses that 18-minute 38. A private communications request went out from Kovacs's channel to Peter Wynn that I did not have access to the full private exchange. I only had the guest quarter visual feed and the external side of her line.so. I watched her. She sat at a small desk in her room, one hand resting by the comm unit, posture straight, face calm, speaking in the tone of a professional discussing delivery timing for routine cargo, and anger, and celebration, and raised voice. Whatever she said, she had thought it through long before that moment. She spoke for 4 minutes, 18-minute 40. Kovacs accepted the terms. The withdrawal from the Sol system took 6 cycles. The platform stayed in position the entire time and never fired. That part matters. Earth did not need to destroy us. Destruction would have been simpler in one sense, but less useful. This was not only a military defense that IT was a demonstration, but a statement written at fleet scale. Admiral Finn checked in at agreed intervals. Professional, precise, almost cold in how little satisfaction he allowed into his voice that I found that more unsettling than open mockery would have been. Mockery is emotional. This was educational. Peter Wynn remained aboard the Ascendancy for 2 cycles after the withdrawal began. The original safe passage agreement was still in effect. She and the 43 named individuals attached to her demand were to be transferred at the outer handoff point. That, I eventually realized, was another part of the brilliance. Even the escape plan had been real. The passage was not covered that IT was logistics. Those 43 individuals were never frightened civilians fleeing with a defector. They were her people, her team. The ones who had helped build the trap and now needed extraction after its success. The IT is very unpleasant to discover that the lie was so strong, because so much of it was true. Then something happened that made the entire operation feel even more precise than I had feared. That I received a message in deep archive. Short, simple, direct. Peter Wynn has requested a meeting with intelligence analyst Breath. Clearance approved by Commander Kovacs. I stared at the message for a long time. I was a suspended grade 4 analyst. N.O. authority. N.O. command role. N.O. public significance. M.Y. reports have been dismissed. M.Y. warnings have been buried. There was no reason a human strategist at the center of the greatest humiliation in recent Vorak military history should want to speak with me. Unless, of course, there was a reason. And with humans, there is always a reason. I went to the meeting room. The guard outside looked deeply uncomfortable, which improved my mood slightly. Peter Wynn was already inside, sitting calmly, hands resting flat on the table. Alone, I sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You wrote 3 threat assessments." Not a question. The first before I arrived. The second on cycle 16. The third on cycle 24. Yes, I said. The second and third were about freight concentration at the outer system coordinates. Yes. She nodded once. I read them. That took a second to reach my brain properly. You read them. Copies reached my terminal, she said. I won't explain how. Of course she would not. And of course she had at that point. I would have been more surprised to learn she had not quietly read half our internal systems. I looked at her and asked the only question that seemed useful. Why ask to see me? She held my gaze evenly. To finish the conversation, she said. I did not answer. She continued. The one where you understand what happened. There are moments when you realize you are not in a meeting, not in an interrogation, not even in a debrief. You are in a lesson, and the person across from you has known that from the start. That was one of those moments. She leaned back slightly. The Vorak Collective has expanded aggressively for decades, she said. We knew Earth was on your future target list. We had time to decide how to respond. I stayed silent. There were other options. Direct diplomacy, open deterrence, alliance building, strategic warning. Each had weaknesses. She paused. The option we chose offered the most lasting outcome with the least extended conflict. You let us think we were winning, I said. She shook her head. We let you enter under conditions we controlled. That is different. That answer irritated me because it was both cold and accurate. You controlled the signal, I said slowly. The story, the information environment, the route, the timing. Yes. You needed us committed. Yes. Committed enough, I said, that once you revealed the truth, the lesson would be permanent. For the first time, something in her face changed. Not softness, not pity, more like recognition. The expression one analyst gives another when the second one finally catches up to the shape of the model. Yes, she said. That is correct. I looked down at the table for a moment, then back at her. The formal acknowledgement clause, I said. That was not really a practical demand. No, she said. It was a record. A record that made sense at once. Not just for us, for everyone. Every species in neighboring space. Every government that had ever wondered whether the Vorak collective could be resisted. Every future target. You were sending a message, I said. We were sending several, she replied. And we were one of the audiences. Yes. There was a long silence after that. Then I asked the 43 names. My team, she said, not even a pause. The analysts, engineers, logistics specialists, and platform coordinators. I was not going to leave them behind. Of course, she was not. Of course, the defector asking safe passage for 43 civilians was actually securing extraction for the 43 people required to execute the operation. Another truth inside the lie. Another clean line hidden in the mess. You never defected, I said. She met my eyes. I was Earth Strategic Intelligence before I boarded that shuttle, she said. I remained Earth Strategic Intelligence while speaking to your commanders. And I remained Earth Strategic Intelligence while advising them on which approach vector to use. There's a certain kind of humiliation that arrives too complete to feel HOT feels cold. Precise that I sat in that cold and asked, the political grievance? Your removal from position. That was real. That surprised me more than it should have. She continued before I could ask the next question. I was removed. What happened after that was my own decision. I studied her face, then said, carefully, did your removal perhaps involve proposing an operation like this one to people who thought it was too dangerous to approve openly? She said nothing. She did not need to. The silence answered it. And if it failed, I said, following the structure as it unfolded, you would not have represented official Earth policy. You would have been a disgraced former officer acting on your own. Complete deniability. Again, that expression. Again, that slight shift. You would have made a good intelligence analyst, she said, that I almost laughed. I am an intelligence analyst. A suspended one, she said. Yes. I know, she replied. I read your personnel file. Of course she had it. I should stop thinking that sentence and simply assume it applies to everything that I sat back. The room felt smaller now. Not from threat, from clarity. What happens now? I asked. The fleet withdraws. The non-engagement period holds. The platforms return to standby. She paused. For most parties. I looked at her sharply. Most? The agreement governs the Vorak Collective and the Earth Defense Coalition in military terms, she said. It does not govern private correspondence. There was the next move, cleanly placed on the board. You want information? I want conversation, she said. That difference mattered to her. Yes, oh, I listened. Our planners need to understand how your institutions make choices, she said. Where dissent is ignored. How intelligence loses against operational momentum. What a credible warning voice looks like inside your system, and how that voice gets managed when it becomes inconvenient. I let that settle. You are asking me to inform on my own government. I'm asking you, she said, to talk to me as a private individual. Because you spent 8 years studying us. Because you noticed a freight pattern. Because you were the 12%. That number hit me immediately. The probability estimate, I said. Yes. You knew there was a chance someone inside would see the pattern. Yes. And I was that chance. She held my gaze. You were the 12%. I wish I could say I answered brilliantly. I did not. I just sat there, looking at the woman who had helped design the collapse of our invasion and hearing with awful clarity that I had not nearly ruined her plan. I had been part of it, designed into it, expected, needed. I will think about it, I said at last. They made the faintest hint of something pass through her expression, approval perhaps. That is a better answer than I expected, she said. Then she stood, extended her right hand in a human farewell gesture. I had read about handshakes. I had never performed one. Still, I extended my nearest manipulator claw and did my best at it was, I suspect, the least elegant handshake in recorded diplomatic history. Yes, she turned toward the door. I asked one final question. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? She paused. Knew what? That I was watching. That I had flagged the Earth files. That I saw the freight pattern. She turned back slightly. Yes. I felt my breath stop. The personal flag on Earth's coordinates, she said. Then the second flag, bright red, added on cycle 9. Our monitoring picked up the activation. My mind jumped instantly to the memory. The common area, her glance upward, the little smile. You looked at the ceiling, I said. You were looking toward the analyst relay. Yes. You smiled because you knew. She nodded once. I smiled, she said, because I knew the right person was watching. Then she opened the door and left. And I sat there in that meeting room, alone, with one truth settling slowly and completely into place that I'd spent cycles believing I was the analyst who almost exposed the operation. I was not that I was the analyst whose warning would be ignored in exactly the right way. The operation had not merely accounted for internal dissent, that IT had required it. And somehow, without ever realizing it, I had become one more carefully placed piece in a human plan. I sat with that for a very long time after she left. Not moving, not thinking in any useful order, just sitting there with one terrible realization unfolding layer by layer inside my head. I had not been the analyst who nearly ruined the human plan, that I had been the analyst the human plan needed. That is a different kind of humiliation, that a deeper one. That IT is one thing, to be ignored at IT is another thing. To realize you're being ignored was itself part of the design. Peter Wynn had not only studied our ships, our command habits, and our intelligence methods. She had studied our bureaucracy. She knew exactly what kind of warning would be seen as serious enough to log, but not serious enough to stop action. She knew exactly what kind of analyst would raise concern in a credible way and then be pushed aside as inconvenient. She knew Thoric would think reassigning me solved the problem. She knew Kovacs would feel safer once the only unpleasant voice in the room had been removed. She knew the system would hear me, just enough to dismiss me properly. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. The 12% had not been a risk they accepted at IT, had been a feature they built around that I was not reinstated right away after the withdrawal. That would have required too much honesty from too many people. The formal review of my conduct lasted 18 cycles. That is a very long time when you're waiting for an institution to decide how much truth it can survive admitting. The final ruling was written in the usual careful official language, the language organizations use when they cannot openly say we were wrong, but have also run out of ways to pretend they were right. That IT stated that my assessments had identified certain anomalies of potential significance, and that the value of broad-spectrum monitoring of non-traditional intelligence indicators had now been demonstrated. I was reinstated at grade 4, the same grade that N.O. promotion, that N.O. apology, N.O. ceremonial acknowledgement, that I had spent multiple cycles trying to stop the exact disaster that had then happened exactly as described. Still, I was reinstated, and I was assigned to a newly formed unit called the Adaptive Threat Intelligence Division. A long, important sounding name. In practice, it meant this: the department that watches the things everyone else thinks are not worth watching. I was the first member of that division. For 6 cycles, I was also the second member, third member, an entire administrative structure. Then they sent me 2 junior analysts. One of them was named Cell. Cell had 4 working eyes, endless curiosity, and the sort of excitement about strange data patterns that senior staff usually consider professionally unhealthy. On the first day, Cell spread data strips across the shared station and said, with no concern for how that might sound, I requested this assignment because of your Freight pattern analysis. I looked up the civilian logistics angle, Cell said, almost glowing. Nobody studies civilian logistics when they assess military threat structure. It is a massive blind spot. Yes, I said. The humans used that because they knew we would not look there. Yes. Cell stared at the wall display for a moment, then said with the clear speed of a young mind still allowed to reach conclusions honestly. So the real lesson is that you have to pay attention to what is missing as much as what is shown. I remember that very clearly, because I had spent years trying to say that in increasingly careful language, and Cell had managed it in one sentence before midday. Welcome to the division, I said. That was the official version of what happened next. The internal version. The bureaucratic version. The version that could be filed, cited, archived, and discussed in workshops about improving interspecies threat evaluation. But there was another version, a private one, and that one began 6 human months. After the withdrawal, I say human months because that is how Peta Wynn marked time in the message she sent me. The message arrived on a private channel through a routing path she had made me aware of during our meeting. For the record, I had absolutely not spent those 6 months quietly making sure I could receive messages through that route without creating any official trace. The message was short, direct, in a wasted language. She asked me 3 questions. The first was about how Vorak intelligence reports are prioritized when they conflict with an operation already moving forward. The second was about how much authority field commanders have to override analysis coming from centralized intelligence teams. The third was about what usually happens to analysts who file dissenting reports during major campaigns. They were excellent questions, sharp, targeted. The kind of questions I would have asked if I were building a threat model of the Vorak Collective from the outside. Which, of course, was exactly what she was doing. I considered not replying. I considered deleting the message. I considered reporting the contact through official channels, though even thinking that felt ridiculous. Then I thought about Cell across the room, tracing civilian freight patterns. I thought about the years I had spent studying Earth without anyone caring to. I thought about what I had learned from observation alone, and how much more might be learned by asking the one person who had seen straight through us and built an operation to fit the shape of our weaknesses. Then I thought about something I had once read in a human philosophical archive, a line I had saved because it bothered me by sounding too simple. The beginning of wisdom is admitting you do not know enough at the time. I had found it irritating. Later, I found it useful I wrote back that I answered all 3 questions. Then I asked 3 of my own. Her reply came within 48 hours. She answered mine. Then asked 3 more. I answered those. She answered the next set. And just like that, without either of us ever naming it, a correspondence began. I want to be careful here. It was not friendship, not in the ordinary sense. Not at first. There was too much history for that. Too much calculation. Too much mutual awareness that we both knew exactly who the other was. She was the strategist who had helped engineer the greatest humiliation of my government's recent military history, that I was the analyst whose system had proven weak enough to be useful to her. That is not the usual foundation for warm companionship, and yet it also was not defection. Not really, though I'm certain any intelligence oversight body that discovered the exchange would have used that word instantly and loudly. That IT was something else, that a long-running conversation between 2 people who noticed the same kinds of things, who distrusted easy explanations, who watched what others ignored, who asked why at the exact moment institutions prefer certainty. That was the strange part. Not that we talked, that it felt natural. Over time, I learned more about humans from those private exchanges than I had learned from 12 years of files, recordings, cultural archives, and intercepted transmissions. Because observation tells you what a species does, that IT does not always tell you why. And the why is the part that matters. From Peta Wynn, and from the question she asked, and from the answer she chose not to soften, I began to understand the central fact about humanity, that IT is not physical power, not fleet size, not technology, not even resilience, though they have more of that than most species expect. Know what humans possess in truly dangerous quantity is patience, at a very particular kind of patience. The patience to plan over long periods without losing interest. The patience to build something slowly while appearing reactive. The patience to let another species underestimate them for years if that underestimation is useful. And even more dangerous than their patience is what they combine it with: adaptation. They can hold a long-term objective and still change methods repeatedly without becoming confused about the goal. Most species are good at one of those things. Very few are good at both. Humans are. That is what makes them so difficult. The freight operation in the outer system had not been improvised at IT, had not been a quick emergency response to our fleet that IT had been active for years. The 4 hidden platforms had been in development long before I ever noticed the shipping pattern. Peta Wynn had been studying Vorak institutional behavior for years before she stepped onto that shuttle. And while we spent 40 years watching Earth become space-capable, classify them, downgrade them, mock them, and slowly prepare to absorb them, they'd spent those same decades watching the shape of our assumptions, watching what we ignored, watching how we handled internal disagreement, watching what kind of evidence we respected and what kind we automatically dismissed. That was the deeper lesson, not survey the coordinates. Though yes, always survey the coordinates, not even look at what is missing. Though yes, absolutely do that. The deeper lesson was institutional, that if your system punishes inconvenient voices and rewards confident momentum, an intelligent enemy does not need to break that system. They simply need to understand it and let it behave as designed. That thought stayed with me for years, long enough that it stopped feeling like an insight and started feeling like a constant pressure behind every report I wrote. The correspondence with PETA continued. Not every cycle, not on a predictable schedule. That would have been careless. That IT came in measured intervals, quiet and irregular, like two people passing tools through a wall neither of them intended to knock down. Sometimes she asked about command hierarchy, sometimes about promotion culture, sometimes about the difference between what Vorak doctrine says and what Vorak officers actually do when operations begin falling apart. In return, I asked about human planning structures, about how they evaluate strategic risk, about why their command systems allow so much argument before action, about why they seem so willing to debate internally and still move quickly when it matters. Her answers were never long for the sake of being long. They were exact. That is one of the things I came to respect most about our species. Humans talk endlessly in many situations, yes, but when they're being serious, truly serious, they often become very precise, in wasted terms, in decorative certainty. Just the shape of the thing. Years. Past point 15, as of this account, the official non-engagement agreement with Earth lasted 10 of them. The private correspondence lasted all of them. And somewhere during that time, what began as a dangerous exchange of understanding became something more stable. Not trust, not fully. Trust is too soft a word for two intelligence professionals who each know the other is capable of strategy beyond comfort. But there was respect, and there was consistency. She always answered what she chose to answer. She never made promises she did not intend to keep, and she never once pretended humans were harmless. That honesty mattered. IT also matched what I had learned from study. Humans do not need to be the strongest species in the galaxy to become the most difficult. They do not need to dominate every metric. They only need to keep learning, and they do. That is their most dangerous habit. Every defeat becomes material. Every victory becomes material. Every failed plan becomes part of the next plan. Every successful plan becomes something to improve, not admire. They do not rest inside their own achievements for very long. That makes them hard to surprise twice in the same way. IT also means that if you think you understand what they learned from the last encounter, they're already busy learning something one layer deeper. That understanding became important again in my 15th year after the withdrawal. Because the 10-year military non-engagement agreement had ended, that a new generation of Vorak command officers had come into power. Officers who were not present at the soul humiliation. Officers who knew it as a historical case study, not a lived event. And that created a familiar problem. Some of them studied the event seriously. Some found it embarrassing and preferred to frame it as an old mistake made by inferior leadership. And some, the ones I worried about most, began using a tone I knew too well, the tone of people who say yes, but now we know what happened. I heard that tone in 3 separate meetings in one cycle. Not the exact same words, of course, and one says the dangerous thought in its simplest form when others are present. Instead, they say things like, "We understand the human preference for indirect setup now," or "We have updated our monitoring assumptions," or "We would not be vulnerable to the same type of deception twice." Every time I heard some version of that, something cold moved through me, because that tone is the beginning of every repeated mistake. That IT is the voice of a species congratulating itself for learning one lesson while unknowingly stepping into the next version of the trap. After the third meeting, I filed another report, then another, then a broader advisory memo. All of them said the same thing in different language. Knowing what the humans did last time does not mean you know what they are doing. Now, why reports were received and acknowledged that of course they were. That phrase again, that perfect little graveyard of institutional caution that in one of my more recent private exchanges, I told P to win about those meetings, about the tone, about the confidence, about the officers who believed that because they now respected humans, they were safer from them. She was silent for a moment. Then she sent back a single line, "Oh, they understand that knowing what to watch for only matters if what you are watching for is what we are actually doing." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I answered that I had made exactly that point in my latest report. She asked how the report had been received. I told her, received and acknowledged. There was a pause in the channel. Then another message arrived, short, plain, almost casual. "The freight this time is moving through Vorak commercial contracts." I felt every working system in my body go still. That I wrote back immediately. "How long?" Her answer came soon. After 30 months. That I closed all three eyes, then opened them again. Even the useless one, especially the useless one, because by then I knew enough to understand exactly what that sentence meant. IT meant they were not done. IT meant they had never been done. IT meant that while a new generation of our officers talked confidently about not being fooled the same way twice, humans had already started building around the updated version of our assumptions. Again, quietly, patiently, with freight. So I opened the Vorak commercial shipping records and I started looking for the pattern again, because that in the end is the lesson I learned from the humans. They're not done. They're never done. Every defeat teaches them. Every victory teaches them even more. Every operation becomes the foundation for the next one. And the next one is never just a copy to IT, is adjusted, improved. Built around whatever you learned last time. Built around whatever new confidence you gained. Built around the new blind spot created by the fact that you think you finally understand them. That is what so many species get wrong. They think human danger comes from strength. That IT does not. Not mainly that IT comes from consistency, from the fact that they will keep watching, keep learning, keep adapting long after another species has decided the lesson is over. And lessons are never over for humans, only updated. That is why I am writing this now, because the official military non-engagement period ended years ago, but its psychological effect is fading. Because the officers now rising through command were not there in the Sol system when Admiral Finn's platforms came online. They did not hear Kovac search for options and find none. They did not sit inside a fleet shaped like a target and realize, all at once, that the enemy had not merely resisted them. The enemy had understood them. That kind of understanding leaves marks. But those marks fade when they are inherited secondhand. And once they fade, arrogance grows. Back that IT always does. That I have seen it happening. Quietly at first, at a phrase in a briefing, a tone in a meeting, a commander saying, "This time we know what to look for." An operations officer saying, "Their old logistics pattern won't work again." An analyst, usually one who has never once had to watch a perfect trap close from the inside, saying, "We have updated our assumptions." I hear those lines, and I feel the same cold pressure I felt years ago while watching Peto Win smile at a ceiling. Because they are making the same mistake in a more advanced form. They think the danger lies in repeating the last trick. Humans do not rely on that. They rely on the fact that after the first trick, you build your defenses around it and expose yourself somewhere else. That somewhere else is where they go. Always that I have filed reports about this. Many of them, more than I care to count, some were detailed. Some were concise. Some were written in the patient official tone that institutions prefer. Some were written in a sharper tone that appears when patience is no longer doing the job. All were received. All were acknowledged. That phrase again, IT follows me through my career like a bad smell. received, and acknowledged. The ceremonial burial of useful concern, the polished version of we heard you and plan to continue anyway. Sometimes I imagine PETA when reading those words over my shoulder from across light years and feeling not surprise, not satisfaction, but only recognition because she understood our institutions before I did. Maybe before I fully could. That is the part one resisted for years. Not the military lesson. Not even the intelligence lesson. The personal one that I kept telling myself I had been right and ignored. That was true, but it was not complete. The complete truth was harder. I had spent most of my early career believing that if you notice enough, if you are careful enough, if your evidence is solid enough, the system will eventually respond. The humans cured me of that belief. Not by argument, by demonstration that a system does not always fail because it lacks information. Sometimes it fails because it knows exactly how to make information harmless. Push it downward. Delay it. Label it excessive. Reassign the person raising it. Create a process. Open a review. Use official language. Proceed on schedule. That is how intelligent systems walk into avoidable disasters, while remaining fully convinced they are functioning properly. Humans knew that about us. They knew our blind spot was not just military, that IT was organizational. And once I understood that, I began seeing it everywhere. Not only in command decisions, in staffing choices, in reporting structures, in who gets promoted, in whose caution is called wisdom, and whose caution is called negativity, in which analysts are encouraged to think creatively, and which are quietly sent away to work somewhere harmless. That if you want to know whether an institution is strong, do not ask how loudly it speaks. Ask what it does with the voice that says, something about this is wrong. If that voice is investigated honestly, the institution may yet survive itself. That if that voice is buried, delayed, managed, or reassigned, then any enemy worth fearing is already building a plan around that habit. That is what Earth did, not just against our fleets, against our decision-making, against our confidence, against our culture of managing doubt instead of examining it. And that is why the Sol system withdrawal matters 15 years later. Not because it was humiliating, though it was not. Because it was brilliant, though it was, but because it revealed something simple and permanent. A species does not need to overpower you if it can predict the exact shape of your mistakes. PETA once wrote something to me during our correspondence that I save in a private file that I will not quote all of it. Some things belong to the channel in which they were said. But the heart of it was this. Most governments imagine intelligence is about finding secrets. The better ones learn that intelligence is also about noticing which truths an institution is prepared to ignore. That line stayed with me because it explained not only what happened in the Sol system, but what keeps happening afterward. That we did not lose only because Earth hid 4 platforms in deep space, that we lost because when one analyst noticed the shape of the missing pieces, the system processed that warning into something safe and ignorable. The platforms mattered. The outdated intelligence mattered. The false defection mattered. But none of it would have worked so cleanly if our command structure had not behaved exactly as expected. And that is why I still watch freight. Why I still watch commercial lanes. Why I still read the boring reports. Why I still put personal flags on files that make everyone else roll their eyes. Because this is what I know now. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They're not the largest. They're not the oldest. They're not the most heavily armed. They are, however, among the most patient, among the most adaptive, among the most willing to invest years into a result that another species wants by next quarter. And patience combined with adaptation is harder to defeat than raw force. Force can be measured. Patience has to be outlasted. Good luck with that. When PETA warned me that the freight this time was moving through Vorak commercial contracts, I did what I have always done. I started reading. Cargo trails. Ownership chains. Shell companies. Staging points. Routine shipments that were just a little too routine. Transit routes that crossed too neatly. Volumes that rose too smoothly. Schedules that looked ordinary until you laid them over the right map. That I found patterns. That, of course, I found patterns. Enough to worry me. Not enough yet to prove the full shape of what is being built. That is how it always begins, at a discomfort first, then a rhythm, then a structure hiding inside the rhythm. That I filed those findings, that I marked them bright red, that I sent them where they needed to go. And now I wait. That waiting used to feel helpless, that IT does not anymore. Now it feels like part of the work. Because whether anyone listens is not actually the first duty of an analyst. The first duty is to see clearly. The second is to say what you see. The third, if necessary, is to keep saying it when the room decides comfort matters more, that I no longer confuse being ignored with being wrong. That was another human lesson, a painful one, useful, but painful, so if this account survives me, and if some future analyst reads it while sitting in an unfashionable desk under poor lighting with too many dull reports and too little institutional respect, then let me say the only thing that really matters. If something feels wrong, look again. That if the data looks too clean, ask what is missing. That if the plan looks too easy, ask who benefits from it feeling easy. That if leadership says they now know exactly what to watch for, ask what assumption that confidence just created. And if you file a report and it is received, and acknowledge, do not relax. That may only mean the dangerous part is beginning today. For me, I'm still here. Still grade 4 for far longer than someone with my experience should probably be. Still running the division that watches what no one else wants to watch. Still corresponding from time to time across a channel that officially does not exist. Still learning and still paying attention, because somewhere out there, humans are moving freight, quietly, patiently, with purpose, and somewhere here in our own beautiful machinery of rank, procedure, delay, and certainty, there are people preparing once again to underestimate what that means. That I have filed the report, that I put a bright red flag on it. And now I wait to see who this time will actually bother to read it.